Hello guys, Mr. Luna here, and there's gonna be a small video to explain to you guys how to simplify uh, the roots of negative numbers. Here we have the square root of 55 on our left, but before we start doing that, I just want to remind you, and this whole imaginary unit lesson is based on this principle, is that the square root of a negative number doesn't exist in the real number system. So mathematicians created an imaginary unit. So the square root of -1 is an imaginary unit, what we call the imaginary number I. So this, you can, there's a sequence of numbers, like start with I equals I, of course, and you know that I is the square root of -1. And then you have that if you square the square root of -1, you'll eliminate the radical sign, and you'll end up with this. The square root of I equals -1. And that's the same principle. And then if you have I to the third power, you're going to have and you can prove that. You're going to have -I. You can prove that, but you don't have to now. You already did on your lesson. You just need to memorize this sequence. But just for a brief explanation, you already know how you got this number. Let's say you want to know this I to the third power here is the same as I times I squared times I. I squared times I is going to give you -I. And if you do the same, I to the fourth power is the same as I squared times I squared. And we know that I squared is -1, so -1 times -1 is 1. But this is not part of the lesson today. This is just a sequence that you should, memorize for the purpose of negative numbers. But here we only really need this number here. All right, so first I'm going to write the number here, square root of -55. What you should know is that it is not possible to get the square root of a negative number. That's why we created the imaginary unit I. So you need to convert this number to a positive square root. And by manipulating the number, you can do that. So the square root of -55 is the same as the square root of -I times the square root of -55. All right, and here you know already by substitution that the square root of -I is equal to I. The square root of 1 is equal to I. So the result would be I times the square root of 55. And in this case, you can further simplify by taking this number here, and I'll show you why in this case we do that. So, but even if you write it like that on here, it's gonna be correct. So you can further simplify this number by doing this, and then you'll have, that would be the final answer. All right, let's do another example really quick. You can pause this video and take notes if you want to. All right, I'm gonna do another example. Okay, for instance, we have the square root of negative, let's see, let's just create a number. The square root of -48. Square root of -48. All right, and we want to know we want to simplify that number. So what do? As we learn, I'm actually gonna do it here. Step number 1. The step number 1 is use you manipulate the number to get negative I times the big number. And in that case, you can substitute negative I by the imaginary unit I. All right? Very good. So far, so good. Now, you can do a little bit of a substitution here, but we still need to do something else. This number here can further be simplified. And in that case, you need to get a what you need to do here is, and I'm going to show you here in step number 3, is to get a number with a square root within this number. And you do that by dividing it, by try and error. You see, you could take which numbers within this number have square roots. Well, I could say that, if you can see here, 48 can be divided by 4. And I know that 4 has a square root. So if I do 48 divided by 4, that's 12 equals 12. But even 12 can be divided by the square root by 4. And then I would have 3. So then what I can do is, in this case, I know that 3 cannot be further simplified. And here I have a number that repeats itself. So I can multiply that number. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 3 equals 48. So if I do here, if I say the square root of 16 times, and here, as I said before, you don't have to write that number. This is implied that this is multiplication. The square root of 16 times the square root of 3 is equal to, and let's do this step here. All right, let's go. Let's see. And here you can say, okay, the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. And we already know that the square root of 16 is 4. 4. And so what we do here is usually when you have this kind of, when you have a real number here, the real numbers goes first. So the square root of 16 is 4. That number should go first. And then the imaginary unit. And then your final number that doesn't have a square root. And that will be the end. So we had 2 examples. Whenever I is alone, you can have it here. Of course, always outside of the radical sign, never inside the radical sign. And when you have a real number, the real number goes first, then I, then the radical sign within the number inside. Okay, guys, that's all for this video. I hope that you guys were able to understand, and please, if you have any questions, you can comment down below on the comment section on this video. I'll see you guys the next time.